Hello there, and thank you for checking in on the Designated Pundits. We are doing 2025 Major League Soccer previews of all 30 Major League Soccer teams. Today, we're going to talk about CF Montreal. Joined today by Elias from The Ball is Round Montreal. We are talking about CF Montreal. Make sure, if you're here for the first time, you hit that subscribe button. I think we're going to 1,200 on YouTube, which is a nice little milestone there. You can also go to thedesignatedpundits.com, check out our new revamped website, or just search The Designated Pundits on your favorite podcast platform. We are on all major platforms, so thank you for checking in. Elias, welcome. Let us know a little bit about where we can find your work.
Yeah, much like yourselves, we're on all the podcast platforms. You can find us on Twitter and on Blue Sky at TBIR Montreal. We are live every Sunday at 7:30. It's a little special episode. Tomorrow we're live at 4 because Super Bowl can't really compete with that.
Yeah.
But every Sunday 7:30, come hell or high water. Usually, we try and be as weekly as possible. Of course, life gets in the way sometimes, but we always got stuff. We've got a Patreon where we also post written content. We post more in-depth analysis and maybe stuff we don't cover on the show, and press conference covers, stuff like that. So yeah, we're also on YouTube. We're all over the place.
Love it. Thank you for joining us here today, taking time out of your Saturday to be here to talk soccer. Let's get right into it. CF Montreal, the other team from the Great White North. I've actually spent some time in Montreal. Very nice city. I have pictures I post every once in a while when I was talking to Jalen Neal's mom on Twitter, because that's what everyone in Major League Soccer does, is talk to Jalen Neal's mom on Twitter. All right. Anyway, before we get started, I'm asking every one of our podcast hosts here, what's your favorite soccer memory from 2024?
For 2024, there's again, I'm a Barcelona fan, so there's not many. But it's got to be the women's team winning the treble. That was incredible. It's they're kind of in their own prime Barcelona run, if you will, and they're playing such great football, and it's wonderful to watch, and seeing them win the treble against Lyon, who has kind of been their white whale, if you will, for so long in the Champions League final was great.
Lyon has a lot of Americans on that squad too, right?
Lyon has a lot of Americans, and they have a history of Americans too. I mean, Alex Morgan played there, right? And another one is CF Montreal in that final game, securing the playoff spot because of how just brutal the beginning of the season was. That last run of 8 games unbeaten out of the last 9 was just so desperately needed for this club. So those are probably 2 very close contenders for my favorite.
So let's take a look at 2024. 11-11-13 record, 13 losses, 8-6-4 at home, 3 wins, 5 draws, 9 losses away. 50 goals scored and 66 goals conceded left you with a -16 goal differential and 8th place in the East. You were eliminated by Atlanta United on penalties, and who wasn't eliminated by Atlanta United from the East at the end of last season? Let's recap 2024. Started out extremely cold, just about as bad as I've seen any squad. Finish out with 5 losses in your last 6 matches, 5 wins in your last 6 matches, which is really the only thing pushing you over that playoff line.
Yeah, it really felt like they finally got all on the same page. And it kind of shows again in MLS, quality of the squad is important, but at the end of the day, when everyone's on the same page tactically and just everyone is clicking, it's so much more important. And I feel like it was the only time of the season where everyone was working together towards a collective goal. So whether it was just it took them that long to understand what was needed tactically, whether it was that long because of so many mid-season signings, it took them that long to gel together with a lot of newcomers. But yeah, I think that kind of did skew a little bit of everyone's takeaway from the season, because there was a run where it was 11 games without a win. You get knocked out of the Leagues Cup, you get knocked out of the Canadian Championship, you drop 5-1 in a derby against Toronto, right? That was rock bottom. So I think that run at the end of the season salvaged everyone's takeaway overall from it too. And I still remember you look at this graphic here. That's not a good season. That's by no means a good season. The season that you should be proud of. But the energy and the vibe at the end of the year was very optimistic because of, just like you said, that run. So I think it'll be important to see how they can navigate this beginning of the season, given that they've got 7 games in a row on the road. So
Which
that
is generally pretty common for Montreal. Last year, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on the road. I
yeah,
guess you're trying to avoid those winter months up there in
it's every
Montreal.
year it's like that because the stadium is not winterized, it's not covered, it's the pitch is not heated, so you don't. And the Olympic Stadium is under renovation right now, so there is absolutely no opportunity because they had their training at a local college. Um, their turf, you can't have MLS games at a local college turf because it's like 200 people. That's not gonna
Suboptimal.
work.
Suboptimal. All
So
right. I like when you mentioned about the Canadian Cup because we pay absolutely no attention to that. I just kind of circle Toronto or Montreal because it seems like every other year. So we're a little outside of that bounds. But let's take a look at these 2024 contributors. Yeah, Joseph Martinez is your lead goal scorer, 11 goals, 3 assists. Sunusi Ibrahim, 6 goals, 1 assist. Kokoro with the mustache, 4 goals, 1 assist, and now he's out. Caden Clark, former Red Bull, 4 goals, 2 assists. Bryce Duke, 3 and 4. Ariel Lassiter, 3 goals, 5 assists. And Raheem Edwards, current Red Bull, as of right now, 5 assists. Let's talk about the contributors. Obviously, if Joseph Martinez is your leading goal scorer and it is the year 2024, something went desperately wrong.
yeah, it took him a while to kind of get hot. Like I'm pretty sure 2/3 of those goal contributions came in that last run of the season when he finally, it all
Mhm.
clicked. But yeah, this is a team that without stars, you have to win by committee. You have to win with contribution from everyone, and it shows it here, right? Nobody really had a crazy season. Of course, Kane Clark is, the only one here who had half a season to work with. Um, and he did, phenomenally for that, 3-month stretch where he was with the club. But when you look at this list at the same time, 4 of the people aren't here anymore. 4 of those players are gone. So now you have to look at how do you recreate this, because you cannot necessarily replace Joseph Martinez with the current budget that CF Montreal operates with. So you have to almost like recreate him, and you have to recreate his production. So that's kind of what they did in terms of the players they went out and got. There's some really interesting signings. There were no blockbuster signings. There was definitely some news, the ones that that made the news, but nothing crazy where you're breaking transfer records and stuff like that.
Well, then let's move on to these transfers. Some outgoing players: Raheem Edwards, Lassi Lapalainen, Joseph Martinez, Jochen Souza, Robert Thorkelson, Victor Wanyama, Matthias Kokoro. Do any of those players, leave a hole in your heart? Any of those guys, cause you some real heartache? See
In
them
my
go.
heart, yeah. Victor Wanyama, right? He's by every definition a club legend. He came in and he's, one of the few designated players that actually worked.
Mhm.
And it was very clear that with the direction the club was going tactically, he just was not in the plans. But to see it be handled that way, where he just was not used at all in any capacity, he had the chance to say goodbye to the club on the field, which I think it was a missed opportunity. That is what maybe hurts my heart the most.
Mhm.
Obviously, someone like Lassi Lapalainen who um, came in with a red hot start like 4 years ago, right? 4 or 5 years ago, and then just could not stay fit for the life of him, right? It would be 1 or 2 appearances and a month out, and then another 1 or 2 appearances and another month out. So it was just he never really got to establish over the last 3 years. He never really got any chance to find any form of consistency because he would just constantly get hurt, and you constantly re-aggravate just different injuries. And I mean, of course, Joseph Martinez, right? How do you that end of the season? They don't make the playoffs without him. It's that simple.
Right.
He unified the entire attacking group, which was completely disjointed during the season, and he really focused everybody on the pitch and he made everybody better. That's what he does. That's what experienced players do. And So missing people like that, and again, you have Raheem Edwards, who I think was a really good player, who gave contributions. Matthias Kokoro didn't work out, but all of these people had certain levels of involvement, but it just,
Mhm.
for one reason or another, it never really worked out. And a lot of these are quote unquote projects that the club has brought in, and it's kind of like almost trying to find a diamond in the rough, and it just did not work. And I think this year and last year, with the amount of quote unquote projects that left the club without really making an impact, it's forced them to kind of reconsider how they go about recruiting youth. And I think that they've done a better job with that this year.
Well, let's talk about some of these incoming then. Fabian Herbers, Jalen Neal, Giacomo Veroni, Prince Owusu, Victor Loturi, and Hennady Sinkuk. Is that
Yeah, tag, you're it on reading bad names, Scott.
Yeah. Oh, I'm gonna take it for that one, and that's fine. Look, some of these guys I know, some of these guys maybe I don't know as well. Who excites you from this list?
It's got to be Jalen Neal. It has to be Jalen Neal. He was excellent in that first half of the season with the LA Galaxy. Didn't really get that many minutes in the back half and in their MLS Cup run, but when I got the notification that they had signed him, I was stunned. I did not think that Jalen Neal was available. I feel like someone like him, who's that good on the ball, who's that young, who's already in the national team conversation, is untouchable, right? Even for a club that just won MLS Cup, that a player like that, you do not move unless it's big money. And I think that that's a huge steal. They just added 3 new players like yesterday, by the way, so it's understandable if it's not in the graphic. But Dante Sealy from Dallas, Luca Petrasso from Toronto. These are all players on trial, and Brandon Craig. So they added 3 defenders, which are really good role and depth players. But even with them, Jalen Neal is the big name because you saw that graphic: 66 goals conceded. They had trouble building out from the back. Someone like Jalen Neal is A, going to bring a lot of competition, and B, going to help massively towards improving those numbers.
And you had your 2 head strikers heading out with Joseph Martinez and Matthias Kokoro. This you try to replace them, swapping DPs with New England with Giacomo Vrioni, excuse me, and then grabbing right over from Toronto, Prince Owusu, who people were pretty high on actually in Toronto. How do you see those guys? I mean, it's like a DP striker that didn't work out in another squad. It's kind of a big risk there. And then, taking a young player, maybe doesn't have the same ceiling, but certainly can bring you some goals.
Yeah, I love the Vrioni signing because of the fact that the Revs are going to be playing a significant portion of his salary, and they did not spend that much gam on getting him. So I do think from a balance sheet standpoint, there is virtually no risk to bringing him in. Now Laurent Courtois, who again is getting some pressure on delivering, if that doesn't work out with him, maybe he may be feeling some pressure. But from a pure business perspective, getting someone like Giacomo Vrioni can only be positive, because if it doesn't work out, it's not like you're spending DP money on him. He is a designated player because he makes designated player money, but Montreal is not spending all that designated player money, which is I think it's a very interesting move, because you look at them, right? They're both 6'3", they're both big guys, they're big solid guys. Joseph Martinez and Matthias Kokoro are not necessarily the most physically imposing kind of players. And before he kind of capitulated and let Joseph Martinez play his own style of free roaming lone man up top, he wanted his strikers to occupy the back line. He wanted them to make runs in behind, to get into the penalty area, and to make life difficult. And Prince Owusu and Giacomo Vrioni are that. They're different kinds of players, right? Prince Owusu is more of an energetic and a dribbler kind, and Vrioni is more of a poacher, but they do that thing where they pressure the back line, they make runs in behind, they get into the penalty area, and they make space for your attacking midfielders. So it's a bit of a shift in terms of what worked at the end of the season, but ultimately in what Laurent Courtois wants out of his strikers, it is more true to form. So I do understand these signings. Now it's just about getting them involved and getting them to understand, the relationships with the different kinds of players that they've got.
All right, let's take a look at this depth chart. I have them lining up in kind of a 5-2-3 formation, 5-2-2-1, if you will. Let's start with the back, with the goaltender position. Seems like this could possibly still be up in the air. Jonathan Soroya, Sebastian Breza.
Yeah, Jonathan Sirois is he's been called up for the national team. He, again, not as good a year last year as he had in 2023, but still okay given the quality of the defending during some of those moments. I still think it's his spot. It's his spot to lose by a margin because, again, he is both younger and just in better form than Sebastian Breza. I don't think they're going to go out and sign a big goalkeeper that's going to provide any kind of competition. I think they're happy with what they've got now in front of goal. But honestly, if he wants to get to that next level, it's all about distribution now because it's a team, again, that wants to play out from the back, and his distribution is probably the most glaring hole in his game. So he's got to get better at, being able to break lines because any goalkeeper can make 6 to 10 foot passes. That's to your center backs. That's basic. But when it comes to maybe skipping a line and hitting a midfielder or hitting a winger, he's got to get better at that because that's still pretty inconsistent.
Okay, then let's move up and talk about these center backs. You have Fernando Alvarez, Joel Waterman, George Campbell. Those are my kind of 3 predicted starters, although Jalen Neal in depth behind them is a player certainly who, when healthy, is young. He can really grow into a role.
Mm-hmm.
He can be one of those modern distributors. You get the ball at his feet from the back line, so he could help you out there. But I still have him definitely as a sub for these 3 center backs, but you also mentioned 3 new trialists that are in loan. Well, if you're playing with a 3-back system, you need 5 backs who can play a week in and week out. So
absolutely,
that's probably good for you there. Is this how you see the starting lineup from the back line?
Right now, yeah. I think Jalen Neal will definitely provide a lot of competition, especially for George Campbell, given that it's been very well established that Laurent Courtois likes his left-sided center back to be a left-footed because they almost turn into fullbacks when the ball's on the strong side. But Jalen Neal, who's good with both feet, who's so good with the ball, will absolutely be causing several headaches for sure when Laurent Courtois got to make that final decision on who your back 3 are. Because again, the quality is absolutely there and it's been established in MLS. That's usually the thing, right? When you bring players in from overseas, can they adapt to MLS? This is a kid who grew up in MLS, who's bred with that culture in mind. So I have no doubt that he's going to be fighting for the starting 11, if not, throughout the season, going to be earning a spot. But this is the back line so far. You can't really take anybody out just yet.
All right. Well, let's talk about those wing backs then. On the right, looks like we're looking at Marshall-Rutty with David Bugaj behind him, and then Tom Pierce on the left. Is that how you see it? And maybe tell us a little bit about what their role is in this system.
Yeah, I think Tom Pierce, now that Dante Seeley was signed, I think he'll probably be a backup to Tom Pierce, who came in last year, but just physically not at the level because, again, you come in mid-season, he wasn't training with the club, so he did take a while to kind of get his legs underneath him, and then by then the season was done. So this is a full off season. He actually got the highest sprint speed when they were tracking like 40-yard dashes, which is kind of impressive because he really was not a pace monster during that half of the season. But his left foot is phenomenal, one of the best ball deliveries at the club since Alistair Johnston, I think. And having a poacher like Giacomo Veroni or even Prince Owusu, having big guys like that is probably a dream for him. On the right-hand side, Marshall-Rutty and David Bugaj are very different profiles. Marshall-Rutty is, he's a more attacking-minded. He was developed as a winger. He turned into a wing-back in Toronto, and he's applying his trade there now. But he's definitely someone that, looks to get into the final third and combine and find that final ball. And David Bugaj is a lot more defensive minded. He also played center back. He's also played on that right side center back when Laurent Courtois rotated the squad. So they offer very different things. And I feel like that's also a good thing because it does let you cover more of that position between the two of them. So depending on the situations, you can kind of adjust. But they've got, and again, Luca Petrasso, who was one of the players brought in, very similar to David Bugaj in that, he's played left center back, he's played left back. So it's, he just have that versatility, but I do think he'll probably be third string behind Pierce and Seeley. So I think that they've got that covered. Now it's just about putting them in the right positions because both Pierce and Marshall-Rutty have proven that they can deliver that final ball and be dangerous, but they have to be put in those situations because they can't just, dribble the entire field and
Mhm.
than just put a ball in.
Yep. It's at some level you got to go forward, right?
Exactly.
Well, moving on up the field, let's talk about some of these center mids. Samuel Piet, I think a name that we're familiar with, and Nathan Saliba. That's who we have on the depth chart as starting.
Yeah.
Is that what you see? Maybe run us through some of this depth.
Yeah, I think this is probably the deepest the Montreal midfield's been in a while, just in terms of pure quality that they've managed to bring in. Nathan Saliba and Samuel Piet were the go-to guys last year. They played almost every game, and I don't think that'll change this year. Someone like Fabian Herbers, I think, whose versatility can have him play both as a 10, like you said, behind Caden Clark or Bryce Duke, but also in that Nathan Saliba spot, who is the more attacking-minded player in that double pivot. I do think that his versatility can kind of put him anywhere. His composure on the ball, his experience, all that stuff, right? He's an MLS vet. I think that he is a really keen signing, given just like you look at the rest of the squad, it's very young. And all the signings they brought in, besides Giacomo Frioni, are under 26 years old, if I'm not mistaken. So you have to bring in someone like Fabian Herbers, who has that MLS experience. And I think that he's going to be such an important piece. When you look at Victor Laturi and Hanai Sinchuk, who are two players that they signed about a week ago, again, Hanai Sinchuk is an 18-year-old kid from Ukraine. And he played in the second division. He is one of the highest transfer fees that the club's paid for in their history. He's got a 4-year contract under the U22 initiative and a 5th option year. So this is clearly somebody that they've been targeting for some time and they're very high on. But I wouldn't expect anything huge from him this year. He very well could, integrate really easily. But again, coming from a different country, you're 18 years old, into a new country. Granted, maybe the weather's not that different, but the culture is, the traveling is, and just the football is. And so that alone is like you need 6 months just to get used to that. And we're not even on the field yet. So I wouldn't necessarily fault him for having a first year that is a little bit more focused on integration, given that it is a 4-year contract. It's very clear that they're not rushing it on getting some kind of return on him. Whereas Victor Laturi is a 23-year-old who was played in the Canadian Premier League, went to Scotland, now he's back. He's definitely going to be that, with his profile, going to be that kind of replacement for Samuel Piet. I really like what he brings in terms of the energy and the work rate. And he does have that quality that he can help distribute as a pivot and kind of keep the rhythm going. And the third substitute here, you got Michael Adedoku. I don't know what it's called, but it's the Heisman for soccer, for NCAA soccer. And really interesting because they signed him immediately without even him getting to train, before he even got to training camp. And I don't remember the last time Montreal signed a draft pick without even seeing him in training camp. They were high on him immediately, like in the press and when the club president was talking, Gabriel Javet, he was like, we were shocked that he fell this low. We couldn't believe that we ended up with him. So I'm very curious to see what he brings, if he gets, enough minutes and what he can kind of do with them, because he's a very creative player. And that's one thing Montreal was struggling with, was just finding creative players that can kind of make something out of nothing.
Up top, you have a top 3, not really traditional wingers, more like these midfield winger hybrid guys,
Exactly.
like Caden Clark. And I'm tired of these guys leaving Red Bull and doing really well elsewhere. We just had DC on. We talked about Stroud. Now we're talking about Caden Clark, who's actually the cover artwork for today's show. On one side, you got Bryce Duke out on the other, but you do have some depth. Yankov, Poku, Sunusi Ibrahim, Hebers. You got a lot of guys here. This is kind of how they played a little bit last year. This is one position where there really hasn't been much turnover. Just talk about what kind of skill they bring, what they're expected to do, because they are not, like I said, your traditional like left forward, right forward kind of pair.
Yeah, and that's exactly it, right? They're expected to kind of do a little bit of everything, right? You have those fullbacks that are supposed to stretch the pitch, and in the Coutois system, you have a striker that's also stretching the pitch and forcing the center backs to deal with them. That's supposed to leave space for your 2 attacking midfielders, who in this case are Bryce Duke and Caden Clark, to kind of anticipate space and then operate with a bit more ambiguity. And that's one thing that Bryce Duke and Caden Clark did well, because they found spaces off one another and they were able to then combine and get forward. So I think that with a striker now that is really stretching the back line and helping stretch the field, they'll be able to do even better with the space because they were at their best when they were playing in open games. When they were playing against the low block, it was brutal. It's just not, it was not working, and they were not really finding those spaces in the same capacity because they did not have that level of creativity and space. Now with an extra year under their belt and with a striker that's a bit more straightforward, I think that they do have that opportunity. But again, it all depends on how they link up with the striker, because at the end of the day, you can create 20 chances if your striker is not in the right spot. If you're not on the same wavelength with your striker, doesn't really matter. As for the substitutes, it's really interesting this year because I think that Mahalo Poku is poised to really have a season. He had a great start to the season last year, and he picked up an ankle ligament injury, and he was out for like 2 months, and he never really got to find his form again. And so I think that this year, if he can stay healthy, it'd be really impressive. The problem with Montreal is that you've got about a half dozen of these cases if he can stay healthy. You know, Dominik Yankov is another one of them.
Sure.
Who, from an execution perspective, phenomenal. He had a great start to the season. He was his delivery, his shooting, his placement, everything was really, really top notch for someone who had just gotten there. And then he picked up like a string of knee injuries and hamstring injuries, and then again, he never really found his rhythm. Another one that's not on the depth chart but does fall into that category is Jonathan Vincent. Again, super talented player when he's fit. So I think that's got to be one of the biggest concerns right now is just keeping your attackers fit and consistent, because or else, it's not going
I think Vincent falls after Vrioni and Owusu on the depth chart, somewhere in here.
I think so too. I think so too.
We're going to see all these guys in the mix, and it might just be like a hot hand situation, or hey, let's just test out everyone.
That's what happens when you don't have any stars,
So I wrote out some 2025 storylines, a few things that we're going to watch throughout the 2025 season. I posed them as questions, but they're kind of just topics or things that we're going to keep an eye on. First, can they get return on the Vrioni deal? Well, they didn't pay very much in the Vrioni deal. So, yeah, I mean, I guess whatever he produces is going to be bonus at this point, right? Is that kind of how you guys have seen it? Like, let's take a swing. We don't know much about this guy, but let's try it out. Because he is right now, I believe, your only designated player. Is that correct?
He is, yeah. Don't expect another one. I know that's another question, but don't expect a second one. But yeah, again, like I said, right, financially, there's no downside. The Revs are paying a significant portion of his contract, and he's here on a 1-year contract with an option. So, I mean, it's really not that much of a risk. Sporting wise, obviously, if you have a striker who's not scoring, it's not great. But financially, there's no risk at all.
Why? What? Hold on. Why don't expect another DP?
It's just Montreal, man. They've been playing with one designated player in Victor Wanyama, who again has had a total of like maybe 2,000 minutes over the last 2 years.
Yeah,
maybe. And that was the only designated player at the club, right? They've made it very clear in no uncertain terms that the U22 initiative is their priority, and not necessarily they've opted for the 4 U22 spots and the 2, yeah. And so again, they've made it very clear their goal here is not to go out there and sign big stars, because I mean, you look at all the French talent that's coming into MLS, and none of it's going to Montreal, and they're not even making a push for any of this French talent.
And Toronto's getting all the Italians. Like, what are we doing?
Toronto's getting all the Italians, right? Look, they're not going to be signing that kind of player. I think Victor Wanyama might be the last one that they signed in terms of a big star from overseas who was world class and who kind of just is maybe on the back nine of his career. So I would not be surprised at all if Giacomo Vrioni is the only designated player. In fact, I expect it to be the case.
I guess it just makes me wonder about what the club goals are. If you're not chase, this is a free spot to have
stay in MLS and out of the Canadian League. Goals.
Maybe.
Yeah, I mean their goal has been, especially for the last 5 or 6 years, has been to develop young talent and kind of get them ready for that next step, be it the national team or Europe. And they've been very clear about that, right? You've got people like Georgi Mihailovic, people like Mr. Chouanier and Ismail Kone who have come through Montreal to kind of get to that next level. which is Europe, but also you've got people like Joel Waterman and Nathan Saliba, and you have all these other players like George Campbell who are now also in good standing with their national teams. So that's their main objective. It's been their main objective for a while now. It comes with varying degrees of success, obviously, when you take a look at, how good 2022 was versus how, bad 2023 was immediately afterwards. Again, Wilfried Nancy leaving does have a lot to do with that, but it is going to make for a mixed bag because you're not, Benfica or Dortmund or Ajax, where you can just kind of spring world-class talent on a whim yet, right? So it's very much still a work in progress. The thing is, you have to kind of have these results to at least make it worth it and have this kind of proof of concept, or else people are just going to be like, okay, fine, there's another young player that you're going to sell in 2 years. Why do I care?
There are some. Sorry, Scott.
So I was just going to say, for the young players as well, though, like for the young players have to see the team is a legitimate pathway, and they have to see
Exactly
real player development, and not also some of that comes with results. Like you might look at a specific player and say, yeah, they grew, they got better, and you're like, yeah, but you guys don't win any games, or you don't compete for things really. So is that a good showcase for me and my talents if I'm trying to choose between teams? Is that the best place for me to actually go? Because who's scouting me there if you guys aren't competing? Like, I guess that would just be my concern.
You're absolutely right.
Especially for young players, I think winning is, atop the list. They're not saying, hey, let's make some money, let's get my foundation going. No, everyone wants to win. These are competitive players, and in Major League Soccer, there are some system teams and there are some all-star teams. They try to be a system team, and they had the best coach in North America, and Wilfried Nancy, he got sniped. I've never seen a coach go so quickly, and like that, I think the team kind of being mediocre, finding mediocrity after that is no surprise. But I do think Courtois can kind of coach up the sum and make the sum better than the individual parts here. So let's lead into those predictions. I think that this team is going to be 8th to 11th place, low playoff spot, not fighting for much. Let's talk about what is a realistic outcome? What's your best possible outcome? And what's your worst possible outcome, Elias?
Realistically, I've got them between. God, it's so ambiguous this year because it's so tough to pin down because of the fact that there's been a lot of changes. But there's a lot to be cynical about, but there's also a lot to be optimistic about. I think a realistic outcome is anywhere between 6th and 10th. There is a lot of leeway there. I think the best possible outcome is something like 4th or 5th and a Canadian championship, which is, again, that's the high end of optimistic / realistic, borderline delusional. But I think that with the state that Toronto and Vancouver are in, Canadian championship is well within reach. And with the depth that they've brought in, and how last year they had a lot of depth, but it was a lot of depth kind of at the same level. This year they have a lot more starting quality depth, not necessarily MLS all-star depth, but where you can actually compete for a starting spot. And if they can just survive the first 7 games, not even thrive, just survive. Like last year, they ended up with like 9 points out of their first 6 games, 9 or 10 points out of the first 6 games on the road. And honestly, you take that with 6 consecutive road games. If they can get anything anywhere near that this year, and then find some consistency with a really home stacked schedule where I think they play on the road twice back to back, once for the rest of the season after that road trip. I think you take that, and then at the very least, top 6 is looking somewhat realistic. Worst case scenario is the injuries come back, because it's a recurring theme every season here. If the team is fit, if this player is fit, if they can stay, but that's right. This is not if football club. This is we're based in reality here, and so I think the worst case scenario here is they end up missing the playoffs and or get another, or if they stagnate. Right. If they stagnate, they don't win a trophy, they end up making the play and they get knocked down, or, they win the play and then they get knocked down in the first round comfortably. I think Laurent Courtois' job is under pressure because this was his year. He got his entire last year. He came in like a week before training camp, right? All the winter signings had already been made for the most part. This year he had his off season. It's his tactics. It's his guys. It's his staff. He's brought in 3 new staff members. Everything is tailor-made to his liking now.
Sure.
And if you stagnate, if you don't show any kind of progress, then all of a sudden now you're looking at, okay, how viable is this? And am I willing to wait another year and risk even more stagnation in this project? I think that's the worst case scenario. And all three of those are entirely possible. I think that's why this year is so exciting for me, because there really is anything that can happen. And there's a lot of upside, and as much upside as there is also a significant amount of downside there. But it's super tough to tell.
Super tough. I think the storyline with this team that I'm going to be watching is going to be that offensive unit, to see if one of those guys can step up, be the main guy who scores goals, week in and week out. And I think a lot of what this team can do over the course of the season will depend on that sort of predictable and repeatable production. Do you have one storyline around this team that you're going to be following really closely this year?
It's just that it's the attacking core, and can they kind of find any kind of consistency, because the midfield is more or less set. The back line, you know what you're going to get, and you look for development, but you know what's there. The attacking core has so many question marks in terms of a formation. Do you play with Owusu and Vrioni together in a 10? Do you play with 2 10s and a striker? They don't even know what their formation is yet, right? They're still working with that.
Yeah.
So that for me is the single biggest question mark and storyline that's going to be followed this season, is if they can get on the same page, how quickly will it take for them to get on the same page? And will it take 30 games for them to get there, or will it take them a month, right? And that, I think, is also the biggest question mark for the coaching staff, because we saw it in the friendly against Cincinnati. I'm sure that the game against Orlando is going to be the same thing, and the inter-squad match they had last week, they're trying different offensive layouts. It's still 3 defenders, it's still 2 wingbacks, it's still double pivot, but then when you get to those final 3 up top, they still don't really know what they're going to look like and how they're going to operate. So I think Kane Clark is the only surefire starter on this team in terms of as an attacker. Everyone else, their position is up for grabs, and if you can prove to me why I should change the formation to accommodate you, go for it. But until that point, it's really up in the air.
We get to see real soon. MLS season starts in about 2 weeks. Elias, thank you so much again for being here with us. If you are joining with us live right now, you can head over to the Nashville stream. That's going to start in about 5 minutes. Having some dog issues, so I got to go take him outside and see if I can get some of that energy out before next episode. But thank you guys so much, and everyone at home, thank you for checking out the Designated Pundits. We hope you see us back here real soon. 30 teams to preview, and after today, 20 will be done. Checking off some good teams here. This was the last of the Canadian squad. So, Elias, thank you again for being here. We'll have to have you on again real soon. And I appreciate
my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, guys. Have a great day.